welcome to Scrollin', a podcast about the Elder Scrolls Online. I'm Ket, and this is episode number 3. So the first thing I want to talk about, and this is actually kind of over a week old now, so if you're listening to this, chances are you've seen this already. But I haven't talked about it on here yet, and it is pretty darn interesting. So on the official forums, so that's forums.elderscrollsonline.com, discussion number 455092. I think you could just Google ESO forums 455092 and find that. I'll also put a link in the episode description, so you can just click on that. At any rate, on that thread, it's a thread titled Raid Buffed DPS Comparison of Each Race by Class. And user SusmitDS just breaks it down in so much detail. How these races are comparing to each other on PTS with practice tests, dummy tests, DPS tests. And he explains the procedure right up top. I'm just gonna kind of read this paragraph because it does a good job of kind of setting up what's going on here. So the procedure says the raid buff DPS of all races is done 25 times for the classes Nightblade and Dragon Knight. Of these 25 results, 20 are randomly sampled out to decrease error. So they just get rid of 5 basically randomly. As Nightblade, which is crit based with high sustain, and Dragon Knight, which is raw damage and low sustain, are on two opposite spectrums of damage dealing rolls, we can interpolate the data to find the overall efficiency of the particular race for all classes, also taking into specific synergies the class might have with that race. So basically what they're saying here is the only classes that they actually did tests with were Nightblade and Dragon Knight. And they did Magicka and Stamina of both, with every relevant race for each build. And then they took captured a lot of detailed data from that and used that data to extrapolate how they think these races would perform with other classes. And there's a bit of, I think, math going on to help them figure that out, as well as some conjecture, some theorizing. So some of the stuff that we'll talk about here, and I'll be sure and kind of delineate when this happens, some of the stuff is like cold hard facts, cold hard data. And some of this is a little bit of conjecture, but very well-informed conjecture based on some pretty extensive testing. So there's a lot of information here. There's a lot of very interesting information here. If you're looking at this, you see like there's these crazy graphs with there's a lot going on. The most interesting thing that I observed with all this is the fact that for each test, so for like the Stam Blade, the Mag Blade, Stam Decay, Mag Decay, for each one of those tests, they also did 25 parses with no racial passives active whatsoever, to use that as like a baseline comparison for all the classes, for all the races. And so out of the 20 that they sampled, they kind of boiled down an average, and at the end of the little graph here, you can kind of see on average, this race does this much DPS, with this class. And the interesting thing that I'm getting to here is that for a Magicka Nightblade, for example, the very best DPS score on here is 60,797. And that's a Breton. Okay, and then the average for no racial whatsoever, so you just deactivate all race passives altogether, so you just don't have a race at all, that score is 58,399. And that really stood out to me. And so the difference between the very best Magicka race and no race at all, I mean, not even talking about whether the race is optimal or not, it's just there is no race. The difference there is a little over 2,000 DPS when you're up around the 60,000 range, right? If you're pulling under 50,000 DPS, probably that difference is going to be a lot less. It's just eye-opening. I mean, I always knew that race was a pretty small factor in your build, and everyone, in every forum discussion when race choice comes up, every time there's a slew of people chiming in saying, hey, the race really doesn't matter all that much. If there's a particular race that you like, it's probably fine to just go with that unless you're chasing leaderboard scores, right? That's always the conversation. And that's true. I'm on board with that idea. And this really supports that, 58,000 DPS with no race at all. Pretty amazing. I think that kind of goes to show you really how flexible these things can be if you're just willing to maybe not be quite so hardcore about the meta, So I think keeping that in mind, focusing on that fact right there, I think will help keep things into focus as we talk about the rest of this. When we're talking about the difference between the best at something and the worst at something, we're talking about a spectrum of 2,000 DPS here. Okay, just keep that in mind. And so let's go over the cold hard facts here. So for Magic and Nightblade, the best damage dealing race is a Breton. And if you want to know all the conditions under which they did these tests, he goes into great detail. There's a section here called Procedure. He talks all about exactly what the conditions were that they did these DPS tests. If you want to know, it's very scientific. I'm not going to get into it all because I think it would take a very long time to cover all that detail. But you can look up the conversation yourself or just take it from me that they went to painstaking efforts to make sure that they were being accurate and empirical and all that. Breton wins for Magic and Nightblade. And it looks like Khajiit is number 2, followed by Altmer. Am I right about that? Yeah. And then Dunmer behind them. My understanding with Khajiit, though, so this is an average of 20 parses, and they're getting, a little over 60,000, 60,411. But yeah, you look through all these individual parses, and you have like a 57 in there, 58. And that's my whole understanding with Khajiit is that the fact that they have that crit bonus, and that's what their damage bonus is it's all based on crit. They kind of have to get lucky to get really good DPS scores, and that's kind of I think that kind of fits flavor-wise with Khajiit. I feel like they kind of rely on luck and good fortune to make their way. So I feel like that does fit, but that's a risk you're taking with a Khajiit. You could be, this boss fight, it might be the best damage in the group, the best damage you've ever done, and then the next boss fight you might be the very worst. And so they're kind of unpredictable in that way, which, again, I like that flavor-wise. I think that's really cool. But actually, like, practically speaking, like someone who's actually playing a Khajiit day to day, that may or may not be a good thing. But I guess you could probably compensate for that in other aspects of the build. You don't have to just totally rely on that crit. So, like I said, I mean, the worst case scenario, we're talking 57,000 DPS, so certainly not bad by any means. So yeah, Breton Khajiit, I think that's probably a surprise to most people. I think most people were thinking Altmer, number 1, then Breton. But I think what we're finding out is that Breton sustain is just so good that you can just ignore sustain completely in all other aspects of the build and just go full throttle damage and don't even worry about sustain. And so they can just keep up that rotation and keep those dots up and hammer more spammables rather than having to do heavy attacks and stuff like that. So they're looking really good. And I wonder if they're going to be brought down a peg. It seemed like their intention, just reading those notes, those PTS notes in the first place, it seemed like the whole intention was for Altmer to be the Magicka damage dealing race. And so maybe some numbers need to be tweaked a little bit. I mean, I'm certainly happy with this. I have a Breton, and I'll probably make a Breton Necromancer is my plan. So, I'll be happy if this is how it goes. It's just got a little bit surprising. I'm also very surprised that Dunmer, who has always been either number 1 or number 2, depending on the patch, for Magicka DPS, is now like number 5, right? For Magicka DPS. You got Breton, Altmer, Khajiit. Okay, they're number 4. Dunmer, number 4. And then Argonian. It's surprising. That's a bit of a fall. But we'll see a little bit later. They're actually now among the top choices for stamina damage dealers. So they're actually kind of the kings of stamina right now, kings and queens. But they've lost that number 1 or number 2 spot for Magicka damage dealing. I'm thinking that'll be adjusted. I think that's probably one of the things that will be tweaked on Monday. We'll see on Monday's patch notes. There is confirmation that some tweaks are indeed going to be made. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. So we will indeed see some changes. All right, so that's the Magblade. Let's move on. The next one is the Dragon Knight. And now as a reminder, these are actual tests that they did. All right, this isn't the conjecture part. This is the cold hard data here. So for a Dragon Knight, the best parse, the best DPS parse that happened there was again from a Breton, 58,308, followed by Altmer, 58,115. So, and then it looks like Dunmer's right behind that. Dunmer's third best Magicka Dragon Knight. That just seems so weird, right? It's like, I thought Dunmer and MagDK was a match made in heaven that would just never be separated, and now Breton and Altmer are better Dragon Knights than a Dunmer for Magicka. It's interesting. I want to point out that the no racial average, no racial passives active whatsoever, is 55,000. So 55 to 58,000 is the range we're talking about there. And what I find so interesting about that is, like, I think that fact, I'm just going back to this no racial thing because it's really blowing my mind. If you're playing this game and you're pulling less than 50,000 DPS, say you're like me and you hover around 40 to 45,000 in that ballpark there. What this shows me is that, players like me we're not even getting the full potential out of the build as it is already, right? Even if there are no racial passives active at all, I'm not getting the full damage potential out of it regardless. And if I'm not already in that ballpark within a couple thousand DPS, then changing my race isn't going to be the thing that gets me there, right? That might be like that final little cherry on top that helps me hit like a certain number that I have in mind or something. But until I'm with 2,000 or 3,000 DPS of that number, it's like not really worth me thinking about too much, And I know there are players that are on that level, and it really does matter for them. But like I said, if you're like me, you're in that 40 to 45,000 ballpark. You can probably just chill with your race as it is, and be fine. But we're going to get those race tokens, and we'll talk about news on that here in a little bit. So change it if you want to. I mean, I guess there's no reason to withhold that information. They made a post on the official forums that based on feedback that they've gotten, that they're going to go ahead and give us 3 race change tokens instead of just 1. And they're also like putting some name change tokens. Like I think it's a name and race change bundle that you can buy like at a discounted rate that they're going to do. So that's cool. Pretty cool. I mean, I probably won't do that bundle thing, but 3 race change tokens is neat. I'll probably use one of them right away, maybe. I'll probably just hang on to the other 2 until I kind of feel like I want to use them. So take a sip of coffee. Hold on. All right, so Breton's looking very, very good, and if they don't make some some adjustments, then Breton's gonna be the new king of Magicka damage dealing. Like I said, I think it seems like they want that mantle to go to Altmer. And so I don't know. I'm kind of expecting on Monday for some adjustments to kind of make things lean kind of more in that direction. All right, so that's the Magicka testing. And then, so now for stamina, we got a Stamina Nightblade. The best parse for a Stamina Nightblade is 60,016. And that goes to Dunmer. Dark Elf is the best stamina race in the game on PTS right now. Seems like crazy town. I mean, I'm not mad about it. I'm not disparaging it. I think it's cool that Dunmer can be either or. It can be a Magicka or stamina build. It's really interesting to me that they're now performing better as a stamina build than they are as a Magicka build. And I don't know, I guess just certain stats are more important to one than the other because they have equal parts, right? They have stamina and Magicka. They have spell damage and weapon damage. Like all of their racial passives are like sort of agnostic in that way. So I wonder what it is that makes them perform so much better as a stamina damage dealer. I say so much better. I mean, Dunmer Magblade gets 60,187. Dunmer Stamblade gets 62,016. So a little, couple thousand difference. But I think that's just a difference between stamina and Magicka. Still, it's just interesting that Dunmer's like 4th best Mag DK and 1st best Stamblade. It just seems like bizarro world. So behind Dunmer, looks like we have Orc right behind them. And then followed by Khajiit. Dunmer, Orc, Khajiit. So Khajiit's up there for any build, pretty much. For any build you have, Khajiit's going to be pretty decent. Like 3rd best. Pretty cool. And then Stam DK. Stamina Dragon Knight. Same thing, just barely. The Dunmer gets the best score there, 60,137, followed by Orc, 60,134. So literally like 3 points behind over a 20 parse average. And then it's Redguard right behind them. So Redguard's still in the running, 60,099. So like 100 less DPS than the other 2. So just like pretty much right there in that same league. We probably could take a random sampling of 20 more parses and they very well could maybe even be the very best out of those. It's so close that it's hard to account for RNG, just crit chance and all that. And let me back up. The Stamina Nightblade with no racial passes, 59,000. So you're getting 59,000 with no racial passes, and then you're hitting a ceiling of 62,000. So it's like a 3,000 difference there. The floor is 59,000. And then the no racial for Stamina Dragon Knight, 56,000. So just Dragon Knight in general does less damage than a Nightblade. So then they take that data, like these are the ones, these are the real parses that they did, the real testing, the hard numbers, and they take those results and they sort of extrapolate how they think these races are going to perform with these other classes, right? So this part coming up is the conjecture part. It's just it's a very educated guess based on a lot of extensive testing. So it's it's a very good guess, but this stuff here is not based on actual observations. So just keep that in mind. So he gives a score. He makes this like really detailed like bar graph, and gives a score for every single race and how he thinks they would perform with any given class. All right, and he gives them a score from 1 to 10. And so I'll try to give you a quick overview of what this is looking like according to this. So on a scale of 1 to 10, Altmer looks like a 9 for every single magic build. Any magic spec whatsoever, Altmer is going to be very good, a 9. I'll just do magic first, and we'll go to stamina after that. So as you probably guess, the 10s are going to go to Breton. And Breton is basically expected to be 10s across the board in their current state. 10s across the board, except in the case of Templar, where they get a 9 with Templar. For some reason, I'm not. I guess it's because Templar already has very good sustain, so maybe a class with other passives could take advantage of Templar a little better, possibly. That's what the guess is there. Dunmer looks like, all their best scores are with Stamina builds. Stamina Nightblade, Stamina Templar, Sorcerer, basically all Stamina builds, Dragon Knight, Warden, 10s across the board basically, except Templar and Sorcerer, 9s on those, still very, very good. And they're getting 7s and 8s with Magicka builds, Dunmer are. Khajiit getting 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s is what they're expected to get. They're expected to, looks like, possibly be the best Templars in the game. He's giving them a score of a 10 for both Stamplar and Magplar for Khajiit. And I guess that's because Templars have passives that give you additional crit damage. But, so do Nightblades. They have similar passives. And I wonder, he's giving them 9s for Nightblades, both Magicka and Stamina. So I wonder what the thinking is there exactly. Because it seems like those would, which I guess, the difference between a 9 and a 10, as we said on the scale, is maybe like the difference of maybe 500 DPS-ish or something like that. And he even says here, like, this is I'm going to read his exact words, this is a very close comparison. Races with a score of between 7 and 10 will be basically indistinguishable outside of some exceptions and are considered specialized races for the role. So anything that scores a 7 or more is considered a perfect fit for that role. And he says the difference between a 7 and a 10 is going to be basically undistinguishable, right? Like from one parse to the next, it could flip back and forth, but just due to the crit chance and RNG. So these are very, very close comparisons. And he even says races with scores of around 4 to 6 are very viable for the role. I mean, and that coincides with what we were saying with the no racial tests above, right? I mean, the no racial tests were only like a couple thousand less than the very best score. So it's not surprising that races that only score a 4 or 6 on this chart here are still going to be fine. Like Argonians. My main Magic Nightblade is an Argonian, and he's a monster, and he shreds. So I think I want us to just keep reminding ourselves that this is a very narrow spectrum we're talking about here. For stamina builds, like I said, Dunmer looks like they're pretty much on top. Nightblade, Dragon Knight, Wardens, they have 10s for those. They have 9 for Templar and Sorcerer. And then for basically any Magicka spec, they're scoring an 8, except for Templar. It looks like they're scoring a 7 for a Magicka Templar. And just keep in mind what we just said on that note. He says anything between a 7 and a 10 is going to be almost indistinguishable. It's going to be real hard to tell a difference. So even though they're, for Magicka, they're scoring a 7, and for Stamina, they're scoring these 10s, it's probably not actually much of a difference, or a very noticeable one at the very least. So right behind Dunmer in the Stamina category right now, looks like it's Orc. Looks like Orc's doing is expected to do the best with the current state of things. And their highest scores are for a Sorcerer and a Dragon Knight. They're expected to be a 10 out of 10 for those two particular. They have them at a 9 for Nightblade, 8 for a Templar, and a 9 for a Warden. So overall, very strong choice for any stamina role, an Orc, absolutely. Redguard, between 7s and 10s. For some reason, they have them at a 10 for Stamina Sorcerer and Dragon Knight, but then at a 7 for everything else. And I'm not sure what the reasoning is there, other than, Redguard's very good at sustaining, and I guess a Stam Sorc and a Stamina Dragon Knight both struggle to sustain. So maybe the Redguard would be the best choice for them, whereas these other classes have some good built-in sustain, so maybe those passes would be better if they were more damage focused for those classes. Is my guess, is what they're thinking there. Imperial's very low. Their very best expected score is a 6 for a Stamina Sorcerer. And again, anything between a 4 and a 6 is considered viable according to this guy's standards. So viable as a stamina as any stamina roll. 5s for everything else except for 6 as a sorcerer. So we can say viable is kind of the best we can say there. And just a quick recap of just kind of how he lays it out here. He says Altmer is great for any Magicka roll. Bosmer, great for all stamina rolls. We didn't really cover Bosmer all that much. They're set at a 9 for Stam Blades and 8 for every other stamina build. I guess I just didn't point them out because they just don't have any scores of a 10, so that little spike didn't stand out to me. But they definitely seem consistent and solid. And, they have some good sustain. Bosmer, great at all stamina rolls. Khajiit, excellent Templar, both Magicka and Stamina. There's more notes in this. I'm just reading the top one. Breton, excellent at all Magicka rolls except Magicka Templar, in which case they're just great. They're just great at Magicka Templar, not excellent. Remember, they scored a 9 as a Magplar, 10 as everything else. Redguard, excellent Stam Sorc and Dragon Knight. Good all the rest of the stamina rolls. Orc, excellent Stam Sorc, excellent Stam DK. Nord, decent Stam DK. Argonian, decent at all Magicka rolls, fair at all stamina rolls. That one hurts, because I have an Argonian. But, I just got to remind myself, again, it's such a narrow range we're talking about here, right? So my Argonian's actually doing fine. Dunmer makes an excellent Stamina Nightblade, Stamina Warden, and a Stamina Dragon Knight for Dunmer. And they're great at most other rolls, but most other damage dealing rolls, except for a Magicka Templar in which case they're simply good, right? But seems like they're the best for stamina right now. That's one I'm expecting to be tweaked a little bit on Monday. I think they're going to want them to still be a good choice for Magicka damage dealers. They don't want them to be third or fourth best. I mean, I don't know. I may be putting words in their mouth. Maybe they do. Maybe that's exactly what they want. But it seems like they want it. Historically, that's such a far fall. I mean, even though I know we're talking about such a narrow range, but people get hung up about this stuff, about, well, who's the best? Technically, even if it is just a few thousand DPS, we got to know who is the best. And, if Dunmer's technically third or fourth best, some people might not be happy about that. Even though I think it's fine. It's fine, I think. Imperial, decent as a Stamsork. Fair at everything else. So get out of here, Imperial. That's funny. So that's a summary of that. That took us, how long? It took us a while to get through that. That's okay. I like talking about it. And I'm not trying to. Again, I want to point out this is on the Elder Scrolls official forums, forums.elderscrollsonline.com/en/discussion/455092. You can probably just Google search, ESO raid buff to DPS comparison and find it that way. Also be sure, and I'll put a link in the show notes, and you can just click on that and find it there. And the poster's name is SUSMITDS, SUSMITDS. And I read the official forums quite a bit. This guy is all over the place on here. He does a lot of hard work. And there's no Z next to his name. I don't think he's a ZeniMax employee. I think he just likes playing this game a lot and does all this crazy testing. And we all get to benefit from it. It's really cool. So thank you. Thank you, SUSMITDS. Appreciate the hard work. And just reading some other comments on the feedback forums relating to race changes. I think the most predominant criticism I've seen, and I think SUSMITDS is actually one of the main commenters about this, was for Khajiit. They feel that Khajiit really could use a bit more sustain. True that they are capable of reaching these really great DPS numbers if they're lucky, but then the times when they're not lucky, what about those times? And you're just kind of out of luck there. And he's just suggesting you could kind of compensate for that by giving them a little extra sustain. And he made a point that the health recovery probably isn't all that useful for most players. Especially in PvE, it's really probably not useful at all for anyone. So the suggestion that he was making was, maybe just get rid of that health recovery completely, and split what's left of those attribute points into, or not attribute points, but take those points out of the health recovery and split them between magicka and stamina recovery instead, and that way they'll be just a little more competitive, and that'll help compensate for that kind of random crit thing that they're dealing with there. Otherwise, people seem, I think, more or less happy with how things are, with maybe a tweak or two. Now, there's some people upset about some things, I know some people are not happy about the changes with the Bosmer, losing that 20% damage from sneak, and just the sneak changes in general. I get that. If you're, of a certain play style, if you do a certain play style, and now that's gonna get in the way of that, that can suck. I know for some people, it's gonna be, they're really excited about these Bosmer changes. I guess it just really depends on your play style, and the stuff that you like to do. Speaking of Bosmer, Speaking of Bosmer and just these race changes, If you want some more info specifically about Bosmer, there's a really great PvP YouTuber. It goes by Grim Hollow. If you haven't heard of him, he mains a Stamblade in PvP, and he is vicious. And I really love his videos. He gives great commentary. He's a very great speaker, and his videos are high quality. He really does some very good explaining. If you want to be a good PvP Stamblade, highly recommend Grim Hollow. And he plays a Wood Elf. And according to this video, he's pretty excited about these Wood Elf changes. And he goes into a lot of detail about why exactly this is going to be a huge buff for him specifically. And he also explains like who else this might be a big buff for, and really his conclusion is that for most players, this is going to be a pretty big buff. And there might be some specific specs that might see a drop in a stat or two. But I don't know. It's a pretty convincing video, and he does a lot of math. There's a lot of math, but there's also just a lot of good talking and some good gameplay footage as well. So I'll put a link to his video in the description as well. You can also just search for his YouTube channel, Grim Hollow, all one word. And I think it's one of his most recent 2 or 3 videos that he's uploaded. So definitely check that out. Some very good info about Wood Elf specifically as it relates to PvP. Probably not super useful info if you're a PvEer. Read through my notes here. I already mentioned earlier we're getting 3 free race change tokens instead of just 1. So I know a lot of people are going to be happy about that. I know I've seen a lot of semi-angry comments on forums about the fact that we're only getting 1 free race change token. So hopefully this will make those people happy. And 3, I think, is generous. That's what I think. If you are curious about some of the armor sets that are going to be available in these 2 new dungeons coming out with the next patch, Alcast did upload some videos showcasing those. He equips them on a character so you can see what the style looks like. And he does a few demonstrations. He doesn't do any like full-on DPS parses, but he does kind of show off like how some of the procs work. And of course he's Alcast, so he definitely shares some of his thoughts and ideas about how they might be useful and how they might compare to other sets in the game. So there's some really cool videos. Again, it'll be in the show notes. You should also just visit his YouTube channel. It's really good. A lot of good stuff there. If you're listening to this, then you probably are already well aware of that. All right, we didn't really talk about the last PTS notes just because there wasn't much to talk about. I was thinking I might record like the day after, like on Tuesday, if there was some exciting stuff, but after reading them, there really wasn't much going on there. So I figured we'll just wait until now. I mean, the most notable thing was what wasn't there, which is, of course, a Curse Eater nerf. I think that's what pretty much everyone's clamoring for, is getting that thing nerfed. It can't go to live like that. Not surprising. There's a lot of people who think it's not actually all that bad, and that the people who are really, yelling about it and demanding that it be nerfed, maybe they're not considering some things. And I guess I see what they're saying. Like some points that were made is like in large groups in a Zerg, you can't control who that's hitting. You can't control who's getting that cleanse, right? Like you're hitting mutagen or whatever, and that's going on who the heck ever. Plus that proc can happen once every 2 seconds. So that's not happening to you every 2 seconds. That's just happening to someone every 2 seconds. So I can get that. In duels, yeah, absolutely. In a 1v1 duel, that is OP. Probably will be banned from most dueling tournaments, even if it does get nerfed. I'm guessing. But I don't know. I've seen some good points being made about maybe even in its current state, in a lot of PvP scenarios, it might not actually be that broken in reality. Um, but I think to maintain appearances, I mean, I think there will be an uproar if people just don't see those numbers change in the tooltips. And I mean, in my last episode, I was right there among them, so just saying like, no, this can't stand. You got to nerf this. Um, but just after reading some more conversations, just getting a little more insight into the situation, it might not be the end of the world, except for in 1v1 duels, and then in that case it might be. But like I said, in dueling tournaments and stuff, they can just ban stuff. They all the time they do. They say, if a mag blade's fighting a mag DK, the mag DK is not allowed to use wings, right? Because it's just not fair because the mag blade can't win. So there's all these rules in dueling tournaments, so they could just get rid of that. But if you're an open world Cyrodiil and you just encounter one sole player and you guys are going to have a fight right there, and they're wearing that, they're going to have a big advantage, or vice versa. So there's something to consider. I do think it's probably still should be nerfed a little bit, but maybe it's not just like so crazy as we're all thinking. And I can always re-examine my thoughts on things and consider that there's maybe some stuff I wasn't keeping in mind. But apparently it is going to be nerfed. I think they just kind of have to, or people are just going to be in an uproar. Something we didn't talk about last time, I either didn't mention it or I glossed over it, but it's interesting. There's not going to be a CP increase this patch, which is the first time since I've been playing this game that has happened. And they say it's not going to get increased for the foreseeable future while they re-examine some things and reevaluate the CP situation and possibly come up with a rework. There's been some power creep, obviously, and they're trying to look for some ways to put that in check. They started with that we can see that in the race changes, all the percentage bonuses being changed to flat values. That's a step in that direction, trying to kind of get things reined in a bit so that power creep doesn't happen so easily, and they can kind of control how much power we have as players a little bit more. So it's cool. I'll be very interested to see what they come up with. If it's just going to be some tweaks to the existing system, or is it going to be like a whole new thing? Just replaced with a different system entirely. Like they've done that once before. We used to have the veteran ranks, and then it was replaced with the current system. I think it's great that they are trying to address these sorts of things, and it seems like they're really making some big efforts to get things truly balanced. And I know these, maybe these race changes aren't the entire solution, but I think it shows that their head is in the right place, and the fact that they're re-examining the CP situation as well. It seems like they're taking things seriously. It seems like they have some real ideas about where things can go, and they're just getting their ducks in a row right now so that they can make some real impactful changes down the road, maybe a few patches from now. I'm really excited. I think Wheeler knows his stuff. I think Gilliam has some really great ideas to share with that team as well. And like I said before, I'm very sad to lose Gilliam's fantastic content, but it's for a good cause, because now all his great knowledge and everything is helping to make the game better, and I think things like this are an example of that. And so I'm excited. I'm going to keep an open mind with whatever changes that they propose. Even if it seems crazy at first, I'm sure it'll be fine. Wherever we end up, whether it's nerfs or buffs or whatever, still going to be able to play the game and enjoy it, I'm sure. As far as the way that I play it, that's what I think.